Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with host Peter DeWitt. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure every student is learning, not by chance, but by design.
Mike Nelson, welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast again.
It's my favorite part of the day. I love doing these podcasts. I learn so much from our guests. How lucky are we?
I know. I just have to tell you that you put me to shame, because not only for people going to YouTube, and they should go to YouTube, not only do you have, new glasses on, but you also have a really great background and a really great shirt on as well. You put me to shame.
Yeah, well, I'm really pretty enamored by this instructional leadership collective here, and I hear they're doing some great work. So I thought I would kind of give them a little shout out today
That's
in the podcast. Subtle. I thought I'd be subtle in doing that, but you kind of gave me the open door. So I thought, well, I'm just going to walk through it, but I think I might have ran through it.
Well, that's okay. I kind of gave you the opening, so that's all good. So, our guest today is somebody that we both know. Well, you know her a lot better than I do, but I've gotten to know her over the past couple of years, Kim Fry.
Yes, she's a phenomenal leader. She is. People are just going to really enjoy this podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about her. So Kim is currently the Assistant Executive Director for, listen to this title, Learning Innovation and Artificial Intelligence. Whoa, that's a mouthful. Let's dissect it. Learning Innovation and Artificial Intelligence. How cool of a title is that for the Washington Association of School Administrators? Her career spans from early days of being a first grade teacher all the way to the superintendent, and now leading professional learning at a statewide level. She was superintendent in the Rochester School District, where she was born and raised, and that's where she had her career. And I think part of what we're going to talk about is she was 12 years in the superintendency, and that's well beyond the traditional number of years of somebody being in the superintendency. And she leads incredible work in the area of women leadership and championing the women into the top position in public education, into that superintendency, where the statistics, as you know, show that it's very skewed male, 75% male, 25% female in that top position. And she's championing that work in a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, and you're the one that actually, I've heard other people talk about women in leadership, but you're the one who has talked a lot, and I think you've written a couple of guest blogs for a blog that you're now my co-blogger for, Finding Common Ground. But you've talked about the idea that superintendents do not necessarily last very long. And I started thinking about my teaching experience and my administrative experience, and you're absolutely right. Like, I started thinking about the superintendents who were in that role when I was a teacher and a principal, and none of them were in the role for as long as you and Kim were each in your role, superintendent. That's very interesting to me. The other thing about Kim, yeah, that whole idea of learning, innovation, and artificial intelligence, just to give some people behind the scenes. You and Kim presently work together at WASA, but you've known each other for a long time because you're superintendents in Washington State. And I've gotten to know Kim over the past couple of years since she joined WASA. And the three of us actually do a lot of work behind the scenes, just having these meetings pretty often about, what are you learning about AI? What's an article you can share about AI? And it's been a great, I've enjoyed the learning. So we talk a little bit during the podcast about the behind the scenes work that we're doing. So we just want people to know that the three of us have known each other for a while. And that's part of the role. Before we kind of give it over to the audience so they can listen to the interview, one of the things that I enjoy about Kim's perspective is that she's always very thoughtful in how she answers questions, and she does a lot of work to think about it from different perspectives. And even in some of the questions that I asked that became very long-winded, she was able to take all of those. Notice how you're not disagreeing with me. She was able to take all of those and actually give the different counterpoints and points to it. And that's pretty fascinating to just watch her go through that process and answer the questions from multiple perspectives. This is where you want to disagree with my long-winded statement.
I would never disagree with you, Peter. So I think with that, I think our audience is going to enjoy this podcast interview.
Yes, happy listening.
Well, Kim Fry, welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
It is great to be here this morning. Thank you.
Well, Peter and I are so excited to have this conversation with you because you are an incredible leader across Washington State, and we need more people to be able to learn from you. So thank you for saying yes.
You're welcome.
All right, Kim. So let's jump right in. You have kind of experienced the traditional path to the superintendency and now leading professional learning at a statewide level. Incredible, vast experiences. So what inspired you to take that path, and what are some incredible experiences that you've had, both positive and negative, that launched you into this amazing career?
Thank you for asking that question. I think I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying that I had some foundational experiences growing up that really influenced who I've become in this career. The first is my mom. My mom, her first work as a working mom was as a waitress. And I had the opportunity to watch her go from being a waitress to being the vice president of a bank. And so I watched what was possible for women in my own household. And I was also blessed with a father who routinely told us, my brother and I, that we could do anything. We could be anything we wanted to be. And so having that background was really formative for me. And then another thing that really impacted me on a foundational level was my community. So I was part of a community that was small. And as a result, going to a middle school and high school that was not huge by any stretch of the imagination, it provided a lot of opportunities for leadership development that perhaps wouldn't have been available to me if I would have been in a large system where you have to kind of share those things more broadly across a larger student population. And it was part of an experience that I received in high school to go to a business week camp where I learned a really important leadership lesson, which was people support that which they help to create. And so that has always been something that has been at the heart of my leadership philosophy, and has really caused me to spend a lot of time and attention digging deep into how do we really get other people's voices into conversations and decision making. So in addition to that, now fast forward to my first teaching experience. And in that first teaching experience, I had the great fortune, although it didn't always feel like it at the time, to experience a really positive, successful principal who empowered us, who stretched us, and in fact encouraged me to go back to school and get my degree in educational administration. And then followed by a principal who really divided the staff, who had poor skills. And so that combination of a really positive example and kind of that non-example definitely influenced who I wanted to become as a leader, and some of the ways in which I worked with staff.
That's great. Thank you so much. Peter?
Yeah, Kim, one of the things that presently you have a pretty great perspective because you were a superintendent, and you also have this additional position with WASA this addition when it comes to AI. And I just know that behind the scenes, what people don't know is that the three of us talk all the time. We've done a lot of work together over the past year or so. And we have these kind of mini sessions around AI. And you've inspired me to definitely use it within workshops and not be afraid to use it. Like that's really been you've inspired that within me. And even reading articles and and we share articles and all of that stuff and we're kind of brainstorming together. So when you've got this unique kind of perspective when it comes to being a superintendent and then also having this position now at WASA where you're focusing on AI, how has the role of superintendent evolved over the years? And how do you help prepare superintendents now for this whole idea of, this growing integration of technology, especially when it comes to AI?
So in terms of how I've seen the superintendency change, I think, as a result of increased access to information, the role of superintendent or really any leadership role, it has changed in the fact that we're not just given as a result of our title, like blind authority to the degree that people used to just assume because you had the title of principal or superintendent or CEO of some corporation that they you knew things that and just had kind of blind authority.
Mhm.
So I think people are more able to check what you say against research, to see the validity of your ideas. I think it's so there's more challenge in making sure that you are using good practice. I think there's a greater need for transparency in where you get your information, who you're including in your decisions. And I think there's an expectation that we are going to change more rapidly, that where we used to take a long time to study things, um, and put pilot projects in place and do things like that. I think the expectation about how quickly we can take action on the latest and greatest research, those expectations have changed. And as a result, for leaders, it is requiring us to be um, more nimble
Mm.
in our approach, being able to iterate faster, try things, create systems that really foster innovation and the ability to change, the confidence to make decisions and not have absolutely everything vetted first, to do experimentation and to be okay with the fact that we're not always going to succeed. We're going to have some failures along the way. We're going to learn from those failures and we're going to keep moving to continually improve the system. And so in terms of like how do we create and support leaders in gaining those skills, I would say primarily through modeling
Mm.
the fact that we don't have to be experts in everything. We're no longer in a system where we can learn everything, for example, about AI.
Mhm.
We can't learn all of that as a superintendent and then depart that knowledge upon the rest of our system. Instead, we need to empower everyone within the system, regardless of role and responsibility, to be learners and teachers within the system, and that we're going to all learn from one another. And so, setting up routines and systems for that to be safe and appreciated, rewarded, I think are going to be important characteristics of how leaders need to lead moving forward. So in addition to just really like teaching skills about what is AI and how do you utilize it in your work,
Mm.
beyond thinking beyond that and what ways can we equip our systems to be more responsive to this type of era that we're moving into.
Yeah, some of the, you reminded me, some of the articles I've been reading lately, especially, Harvard Business Review, to me has been doing a really fantastic job. And they had a great article in this, the May, June this issue that actually talks about the fact that we need to ask better questions, right? And it's not about, it makes me think about, it's not about us as leaders being the fund of all knowledge anymore. It's really about us asking questions. And one of the other articles that I read actually talked about the fact that leaders are not always in the position of power anymore, because when it comes to AI, a lot of students actually know more about AI than their teachers and their principals or their superintendents do. So we're in a real interesting place if we have the right mindset to actually turn it around and ask those questions so we can learn from those students. So, and it is something you model well, because we're constantly asking questions of each other and kind of going deeper with that. So it's really important these days. It's fun. It's interesting to see how leadership has changed. When you were talking earlier about, like, I did have a couple of principals that modeled really good behavior and others that were very divisive and needed to be the fountain of all knowledge. And that's no longer really the case anymore. So very interesting.
I agree. Peter and Kim, I picked up on the word nimble, and you used it in reference to um, being nimble as a leader. And Kim, you have had to, you've overcome a lot of odds in your career. So what our listeners maybe don't know is, you grew up through the educational system in which you ultimately became a superintendent,
Well, you
and you
both
were
have that in common, don't you?
Yes,
We
we do.
do.
And superintendents last like 5 years often. And, when you look at statistics, and you were 12 years as superintendent. The other odds that you've overcome and just have just done great things is only 25% of superintendents across the nation, and pretty similar in Washington state, are female. And I would love for you to play off of that one. You thinking of the word nimble, because you've unlocked things that Peter and I have not unlocked, and in your career. And so when you talked about the word nimble, you talked about it in reference to the leader. How would you share with our viewers, how do you create a staff that's nimble, students that are nimble? We often talk about community that's nimble for this more rapid change than slow process. What are your insights around that, using that history of what you've done in the past to move it forward, in the future?
Well, I think part of being nimble is requires you to be a good listener. So I think that is one thing that has really aided me in my career progression is to listen and be adaptable in terms of um, keeping true to to my core values, but being really willing to adjust approach to best meet the needs of the situation. And the way you know those needs of the situation is to listen carefully, to as much as possible get out of my own head, and really be a listener. Like if I were sitting in the seats of whoever is with me, um, what would I need from this conversation? What's our common ground? Thinking about those things, and then a changing approach to the degree that I could, to meet their needs in service of this common ground, aligned to those core principles. And so that's required me, on multiple occasions to remember that I was often in the exclusively, or the only woman in the presence of male leaders. And it required me to adapt, but I feel comfortable in adapting to the degree I'm not giving up my identity. And so, not being so rigid that I'm like, no, I'm this is my way or the highway, but giving courtesy in that situation as I would in any situation to adapting to meet the needs of whoever I'm around. So I think that is just like this common thing that has carried me through the work. Um, I I think there are other things. I wouldn't be in my role if it wasn't for males who saw potential in me, who helped develop that potential by giving me responsibility, by kind of championing my voice, by knowing what my strengths were, and calling me out in situations, allowing me to use that voice where appropriate in the conversation, which built my credibility with others in that space. And so I think that's one of the things that I strive to do for other leaders, male and female, is how do I listen carefully, get to know who they are, what their strengths are, what they stand for, and then providing opportunity for them to share those talents and skills in ways that elevate them as an individual, and then open more doors for more opportunities, and just watch this cycle kind of continue. Mike, are there other specific areas about that question, that avenues that you would like me to take?
The strand that I'm hearing is, no matter what the group in which you work with, whether it's students or parents or the community, there's a sense of listening and empowering in like what we're experiencing with rapid change. So maybe just if you had somebody that was met, I always use the scenario of you're in the vegetable section of at a grocery store, and you have this parent come up to you that you're not expecting, and they're saying, Kim, the rapid change of IA is way too much. And you're the leader of that system, or you're the leader. How do you respond to that to bring them along? Because that's what I hear you saying, is that you have this style of listening and empowering. What might you say to that person that our listeners might get some cues from?
I think one way that I have found that really helps people open their minds to experimenting with some of the benefits that I see of artificial intelligence is to start with an area of that they find as an obstacle or frustration in whatever situation they're in. So perhaps as a parent, um, inquiring a little bit or using what I already know based on the relationship I've established with that person about an area of education that perhaps is less than ideal in their minds. And then applying how AI might be able to be utilized to overcome that shortcoming or that obstacle. And so I find it's when people get that personalized application um, and utilization of AI, that then it opens them to the other possibilities. So to use a different example in the world of a teacher or administrator, it would be, what's on your to-do list that you just keep avoiding because it, is not one of those reasons that brought you to the profession. We didn't, I think it's very few of us as educators who came to the profession of being a teacher or a teacher leader or administrator that says, I always wanted to do this work because I wanted to do reports. I really like filling out reports and grant applications. So if that's that thing that's on their list that's just sitting there and they've kicked the can as far as they can and they finally have to just do it, helping them figure out how they can utilize AI to do that in a way that takes less time and perhaps is even of better quality than they might otherwise be able to produce in a reasonable amount of time, to free them up for what they and only they can do, those things that bring us joy in our work, be that spending time in classrooms, having problem solving conversations with people, coaching and mentoring, researching and learning new things, using AI to free time to do those things that do bring us joy and brought us to the work in the first place.
It's also, one of the things that you've helped me with too is I'm finding it very intriguing because I also go into AI with what's missing. Like here's the document, right? The critical friend piece the three of us have talked about a lot, or even the idea of like, what are some new questions that I can ask in coaching sessions? So you can use it in ways that can help you go really deep. One of the things, my segue to questions is that your answers are always very inclusive. So it's about how do you find the best of people? How do you draw that out, right? That's very leadership. It's very, let's talk about capacity. So on your virtual screen behind you, for those people that are going to watch YouTube, you have the women in leadership behind you. What are the topics? Because what I have found in the work that I've done, whether it's writing the blog for Education Week, where I actually focused on 17 women all educators should know like 10 years ago, and people still like send it to me, to podcast interviews. When we look at women in leadership, there's almost a reaction sometimes from guys to be able to say, well, it's a women in leadership conference, so I really don't need to know about it, which is completely the wrong way of looking at it. What kind of topics do you are covered at the Women in Leadership Conference that support your idea of inclusion that everybody needs to know, not just women, but men too, who might not be attending that? Does that question make sense?
It does. I'm going to answer it in a couple different ways.
Yeah, that's
Surprise,
fine, because I
my
think I asked
like
it in 4 different ways just in that one long sentence.
so I'm first going to like take a step back and say I think to really make progress beyond perhaps that 25% that Mike talked about in where we have much higher numbers of educate male female
Mhm,
balance in classroom teaching positions and in the principal building leadership positions in the principalship and at central office support positions like assistant superintendents and in those director positions are much closer to 50-50, but it changes drastically at the superintendency.
mhm,
So I think we need to take a multi-pronged approach to overcoming that statistic. And one is to create space for women exclusively. And that is really the purpose like of this upcoming conference is to make a space that is exclusively for women where topics such as how can you use your authentic leadership gifts, have them be well received,
mhm,
um, not giving up who you are, your true identity to take on these roles. So
mhm,
how can you champion who you are, but do it in such a way that your male counterparts are going to be receptive
mhm,
to the message, to your approach, etc. So how can you be true to yourself and still be effective in the role with others?
mhm,
Would be one area that we often talk about in
mhm,
the work when it's women together. I think the other thing is we really appreciate learning from and with one another.
mhm,
Just a different style overall. Um, so making time for us to not just learn from experts, but to talk about our daily experiences and how they've helped us to grow and how we can share that wisdom with others in the system. So part of it, I think, is just providing that space and acknowledgement that there are characteristics that require some um, different levels of support, different types of support. Um, but I think if we just provide those opportunities, it's not enough to really change the system.
mhm.
And so a couple other areas that I like to focus on and I think need constant attention are how do we get males in particular who really have a sincere desire to increase the number of women who are not just in leadership positions, but are thriving in leadership positions. And there are many, many male champions out there. Um, Many of them really want to know more about what can I do to create an atmosphere, a workplace where women thrive.
Mhm.
And so it's sharing those types of strategies. So there's good research about what does it take for that type of environment. What characteristics are in place in that type of environment. And then I think we have to be careful to know that it's not just men who need to know those things. Women need to know those things as well.
No, that's a
So
great point.
I think we can be equally, I don't equally overlook
Mm,
um, the fact that there are parts of the system that may disadvantage women,
mhm,
and just because we're replicating systems that we've been part of in the past, we're replicating our past experience
mm.
in terms of the system. And so, if we can educate males and female leaders together about what they can do to change aspects of the system, I think it's good. The last thing I want to have happen, I have to caution women when we're all together, exclusively women together, is that the last thing that we want to have happen is to create a good old girls club.
Mm. Mm.
So we need to make sure that although there's some times where we want to be together and learn together, we need to make sure that we're not excluding males in our overall approach to leadership, because then we're just going to have the reverse, which is no, we need everybody to be empowered and to use their leadership skills in service to the students.
No,
And
I like that a lot because
important.
I think that what you're talking about too is creating a psychologically safe space so you can have these conversations and be able to move forward. So thank you for answering in such a thoughtful way. Even though I feel like I bundled my question into like four different things, you answered them all really, really well. And it's such a thoughtful response, and you're right about the different aspects that you're talking about for sure.
Yeah, I think that there's one other aspect, if you don't mind me
Yeah.
continuing just a little bit longer, in that I think we also need to work on the system in terms of who's making decisions related to the appointment of superintendents.
Mhm.
Since that's particularly that area of focus, where the numbers are really off. And so that is how do we educate school board members that just because women may be take a different approach to some of the work, it doesn't mean that it's better or worse, it's just different.
Yeah.
And so how do we prepare school boards for those differences and to see the value in both approaches, or anybody's approach, and as well as the search firms that are responsible for the hiring process, overseeing the hiring process for superintendent positions. So I think time and attention needs to be spent educating those groups as well.
Yeah, it's so funny, Kim. We must work too closely together because that's exactly what I wrote down. It's like, okay, if Kim doesn't say this, we need to really put that out there. That I think the statistic is 60% of school boards are females, yet not hiring female
Oh, wow.
superintendents,
I didn't know.
and the majority of search consultants are men.
Mm,
And how do we look at systems if we're the multifaceted approach to things? And I love how you are just kindly putting that information out there for our listeners. And I think WASA has done huge steps of how we can support women when it becomes to salary negotiations. And we have we've had situations where a female superintendent following a male superintendent, the initial contract was lower than the previous superintendent. And WASA has done a great job just, enlightening conversations about that and supporting our women superintendents leading into that. Um, Share a little bit about, the bridge that is occurring this year from the women and leaders and the speaker into a whole group for the audience. I think that's a really unique strategy that you came up with
Say that one more
the
time.
same speaker.
This using the same speaker from the women in leadership group to the superintendent's group. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So we have the great pleasure of having one venue that we use on a Saturday for the Women in Leadership Conference. We're here, and then the next day that rolls into a superintendent's conference, and so we were able to secure Kate Eberly Walker, who is an author of a book about what leaders can do, managers in particular, 9 strategies they can use to create an atmosphere where women thrive in the workplace. And so are using her as a speaker for both the women in leadership at the end of the day on Saturday, where she's going to really talk about how do women use their voice in powerful ways in leadership positions. And then the next day, when superintendents from across the state of Washington, both male and female, will be together, she's going to talk in particular about a couple strategies that they can be most that they can utilize in their systems, not only in their own leadership, but to take back to their building level leaders, to foster those same characteristics within school cultures that really are mindful to not disadvantage women in the system. One of those that I find particularly of interest is being more mindful of time. So one thing stereotypically that has occurred over time is more women have been responsible for picking their children up from childcare and getting them to wherever they need to be. And so, be that, home for dinner or to the practice or to, play date, whatever it might be, dentist, wherever they're going. And we historically as leaders have, especially for other leaders, have been really loose with end times of when we meet. So we might say a meeting starts at 3 o'clock, but we have a pretty loose end time. We get done when we get done. And by not having a clear end time, we really disadvantage women who are responsible for all those other all those other tasks with their children. And likewise, that do you have just 5 more minutes? That post-meeting conversation, being forgetful of the impact those 5-minute conversations that turn into 15-minute conversations can have on women, disproportionately to men. And so just being aware of some of those types of things, how it can really assist women to be able to thrive and feel like the work is manageable and something that they can do.
You just gave me post-traumatic stress when you talked about that. Do you have 5 minutes at the end of a meeting? Because every time that used to happen to me, we called it the meeting after the meeting. And it was just like, oh no, we were together for 4 hours. How do you still need 5 minutes? And it always goes on too long. So we're going to wrap it up. And once again, I'm going to try not to be long-winded in my question, Kim. One of the reasons why I love working in Washington State so much is that I find that the state has always been really progressive. I finished my doctoral work 14 years ago, and I looked at safeguarding LGBTQ students back then. And Washington State was leading the charge with safeguarding LGBTQ students, and before lots of other states. And then, nowadays, when I'm looking at the role of AI and what you're doing within WASA. I think WASA has tried to lead the charge, if that's possible. AI is huge and we're learning every day and trying to maybe not catch up and get ahead of it, but we're trying to understand it. Maybe that's a better way of looking at it. But I feel like WASA and Washington State, have really tried to be progressive where those things are concerned. So when you're looking at the fact that, you're this director of learning innovation and AI at WASA, what are some of the innovative projects that you're currently working on when it comes to AI? Because Mike and I have always talked that we'll hear people say, well, we use AI to write a recommendation or to write a cover letter. And I don't want to sound like a critic, but I feel like it needs to be so much more than that, right? And the three of us have talked about that. So what are some innovative projects that you're working on in your role with WASA in a state that I think is incredibly progressive where it comes to education?
Well, I don't know if they're particularly innovative, but I think WASA is really taking a holistic approach
Hmm.
to the integration of AI. Um, and what I mean by that is we have a structure at WASA for professional learning that has us really look from, you know, what are we doing for conferences? Do we have ongoing initiatives? Do we have on demand opportunities for people to jump into a virtual environment for an hour and talk through key issues or gain information? And do we have individualized resources and supports? So WAS is really trying to make sure that um, AI isn't just about a topic that we have at a AI focused conference, but we're really integrating AI into all of those structures.
Mhm.
So it may be helpful for me to just kind of talk about two events that WASA is putting on this week that we're involved with. One is a 1 hour lunch and learn. The topic is you don't have time not to learn AI.
Mm.
And it's directed specifically for a subsection of our membership, which would be people who are special education leaders.
Mm.
And so it's teaching some real basics around AI for just a few minutes, and then bringing leaders from the field who are utilizing AI in really meaningful ways um, in to share what they're doing
Mhm.
and to share those resources and prompts. So it's very targeted for a specific audience, short term, no fee, um, and has people get their hands on it in the
Mhm.
session. They're experimenting with these tools as they're progressing through the learning. So that's happening. So it's a standalone, specific audience around AI exclusively. Another opportunity that's happening the very same day is we're involved as a partner in a project that's a year-long cohort of superintendents who are interested in improving their instructional leadership skills.
Mhm.
And we do that through using a variety of protocols, including classroom walks.
Mhm.
And so going into classrooms, gathering information, using protocols to discuss what we see and how it might inform professional learning within the district, um, et cetera. And so a way we're using artificial intelligence within that content is our superintendents are doing their culminating projects where they're taking everything they've learned from the year, um, all the experiences they've had with one another and the instruction they've seen at various schools to work on their personal instructional leadership plan for the upcoming year.
Mhm.
And so having them look at that and figure out what have been some of the obstacles um, within their district, within their own leadership that have kept them from really progressing to the degree they wish they would have in
Mhm.
these areas. And some of it is just time and it, upkeep of great practices of pulling in multiple sources of um, assessment information, multiple data sources, putting it together and analyzing that information in a way that they can really make data-driven decisions. It sounds good. They can put the process in place. We know how to do the work. There's that gap between the knowing and the doing.
Mhm.
And what's the gap? What's really standing in the way? What's the obstacle? And how can we utilize AI to overcome that obstacle?
Mhm.
So as they're working through their plans and figuring out, okay, what are the most common obstacles that I can anticipate happening that's going to slow down this work or bring it to a screeching halt? Let's identify those things because we know what they are if we
Mhm.
spend some time in reflection. Let's identify those things and then let's figure out how can AI assist us with that. Sometimes it's just like, I don't really know how to have that hard conversation with a
Mm.
principal in a way that's gonna not damage our relationship. It's gonna move things forward. It's gonna empower them, but cause change.
Mhm.
You know, insist on something different to occur. And I don't know how to have that conversation. Let's figure out how we can utilize AI to have that conversation.
Mhm.
You tell I want you to play the role of a defensive principal, and you're going to have a conversation with you're the supervisor or the superintendent, and you need to have a conversation with this person to help them understand this change in practice that needs to occur, the supports that you're going to put in place for them to be successful in that change, why the change needs to occur, all those things. I want you to ask me AI. I want you to ask me a series of questions
Mhm.
and how we can work through this conversation. I want you to coach me in practicing this conversation. So AI can be utilized that way. Many people don't know that. They know
Right.
about help me write the email,
Yeah.
help me write the report. Um, but just helping people to understand that if we can examine what our obstacles are, there's probably a way that we can use AI to help us overcome that barrier.
Well, Kim Fry, thank you so much for joining us on the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. Are you're the type of leader that your voice, whether it's just speaking to groups or the way in which you design processes and protocols and initiatives, sends positive ripples that really have a true impact on students and staff. And you're making a difference in the world of public education. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
Kim, I really want to say that I have enjoyed immensely getting to know you over the past couple of years. I have a deep amount of respect for what you do and love learning with you. So, your answers for people that are going to listen to this podcast over and over again, um, your answers are always so thoughtful and well-rounded. You think about so many different aspects that I think people really need to understand that too, that your ability to self-reflect and then move forward is amazing. It's inspiring actually. So thank you for being on Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
Thank, thank you very much. Have a great day.
So, Mike, sometimes when you're meeting somebody for the first time, obviously you're getting to know each other at the same time you're asking questions. It's different when you're actually interviewing somebody that you know. And Kim has not done a lot of podcast interviews. She actually said that, but you wouldn't know it from talking to her because she was able to just offer so many thoughtful responses, which I appreciate. And we covered a lot of ground when we're talking about both AI. I think the way she's thinking about AI and what she's able to offer as strategies, even in the last few minutes of the podcast, were really important for people to pay attention to because those are things they can do. And then on the other side, the women in leadership and her focus of just inclusivity and all of that stuff is really important too. So what were some of your favorite parts of the interview?
Oh, there's just so many, but I don't know if our listeners felt like me, but uh, in listening to Kim, she's somebody that I would want to follow, or I would want to be a part of an organization in which she is leading,
Mhm.
because of her natural style, the way in which she's inclusive in her language. Of what was her? You're more likely to be a part of a project if you are part of the creation. If
Yeah,
you are
yeah,
asked to be to create it, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's one of those, blinding flash of the obvious, the BFO, but it is who she is. I've seen her in that work. She's not just saying that, and you could tell by her answers that she's just not saying that, Peter.
yeah. And one of the things that she had me thinking about as she was talking to is for the three of us, me as a principal, you both as superintendents, there were people that were around us that saw our leadership potential when maybe we didn't see it in them in ourselves. And she talks about, her parents and some leaders she worked with. You've talked about your parents a lot as well. So it's always good for leaders to kind of consider how are they doing that with those people at school, right? And it's more than just building their leadership potential. How are you actually helping people see themselves as leaders? Because we need good leaders for sure. So that was a part that I really enjoyed about the interview too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she gave examples and non-examples of what she experienced before she actually went into the world of leadership, and she said that really transformed her of who she wanted to become. But I think that the she made the quote that I want to share with you, Peter, that resonated with me, and she said it in reference to being a female leader. It was in working with other female leaders is encouraging them to not give up their identity.
Mm,
But as two white males on this and having this conversation, I think that line is true for anybody.
mhm.
And I know it's incredibly important in working with women leaders. But the more I thought about it, it was like the best leaders are their true selves, and they
Mhm.
lead through their true selves, which is their identity. And I just thought, Kim, that's a mantra that we need to keep in front of every leader.
You're absolutely right. I remember when my principal asked me if I would go back or told me I should go back and get my degree in administration, which it was called back then. I said there was no way I would be a principal. And I had two guys that actually said, what if you could be the leader you want to be and not the one you think you have to be? And you're absolutely right. That identity factor is really important. So Mike, I have a question for you as we close out. You've
I won't disagree with
yeah.
you. As we started the podcast, I
No,
don't. So here
God
we go.
forbid you disagree with me, with those kind of things. But so we've done a few of these podcast interviews together. How do you like it?
You know, I'm really having a lot of fun. Number one, I love to learn. And number two, bantering back and forth with you, that's easy. That's easy to do. So that and I just really hope our audience it's resonating with our audience. And I know that you and I are both so incredibly
Mm,
appreciative of the people listening. We want to hear from them. We want their feedback. We want to improve this podcast. So I'm having a lot of fun.
good, because it shows, and you ask really good questions. And not only are you a fantastic co-author, but you're a fantastic co-host. So I'm glad you're here. All right,
Well,
everybody, we're looking forward to your
let me just say before we end, the feeling is mutual. So our listeners don't just think it's one sided. You giving me a compliment and I don't give it back to you. So I want to make sure to get that in there.
So wait a second. Does that mean you're giving the compliment because listeners are expecting it, or are you giving the compliment because you really, really mean it?
I'm going to let you reflect on that. We'll learn more at the next episode.
Well, we're always looking forward to getting feedback. So please let us know what you think about Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. And thank you as always for listening. And Michael, it's always good to see you.
Good to see you, Peter.